G'day and welcome to Mark and Sam After Work. Today I want to do a video about getting into ELR, extreme long range shooting. Now I thought a little bit about trying to do this video and to not be preaching, to try and put forward information how I could do this sort of stuff, and I've come up with a couple of ideas. One is to put in front of you what I started with. This is a 243 Hauer. It's in the form I use it now, but I'll go through a little bit of that story and see if that helps do the building blocks of what you should be looking at if you're looking at getting into ELR, if you're looking at the process, a little bit my story to try and help with making your story simpler and easier in the way of making the right choices. Keeping in mind, I don't make brand recommendations. I use products I've found I like, but there are lots of choices out there, and I'd much rather people work out what they should be looking for rather than just going to buy the item off the shelf. And I suppose that goes into the other bit of the conversation which I really wanted to talk about, and that is the fundamentals of ELR as I see it, or where I come from. Like I said, don't be preaching, but the way I look at the sport, the occupation, the whatever it is that extreme long range shooting is. For me, and for us, that's me and Sam, what this vocation, what this thing is, which we started lots of years ago, almost 10 years ago we started doing, was it something that we could do together, something that took both technical skill and good communication, and we're also out in the bush, out in the country, out in the fresh air, doing something as our little team, doing bits and pieces. So it was something that we really sat down and thought that was going to be something that was go and do well, see how we did it. It's also something that involves a lot of cognitive behavior, so modern word for thinking, and like I said, lots of communication, lots of problem solving, both in my technical abilities, with it meant from being a mechanic to where I could be using my technical ability to help me. There's skill, both of us could shoot, but really it came into our communication. It came into, for Sam, her paying attention to details, her being able to look and keep an eye on things, being able to concentrate hard on which is involved in trying to see and pass on the information of impacts, all that sort of stuff. So lots of problem solving, lots of technical ability, but time together, spent out doing things, and whether that's for you, for us, it was our partnership. We wanted to do it that way, our marriage and our life, and we wanted something to share together. For other people, that's going to be, you want to do something with your mates, you want to go out and do that sort of stuff. For other people, it's going to be competition based. Little bit of a segue to ELR in my opinion, but there's all sorts of reasons to get there, but those are certainly in the way of precision shooting, so all the shooting form and the techniques and things of precise, and not precision shooting under the brackets of competition, precision shooting under the brackets of precision target shooting. So extreme accuracy, reading wind and all those sort of bits and pieces, form, how you set the rifle to loads, all those bits and pieces are very relevant to what we're talking about. And I suppose the other side of things that it really involves, and the bit that I would really like to pass on, is that ELR shooting, in my opinion, or my way of doing it, and what I see of out there in the world, it really is about two things, I suppose, mainly to me. One is discovery, so you are learning, you're figuring things out, you're pushing your boundaries by figuring things out, and so to take the next step you need to learn more. Very much that process, and will always be different to the different shooter, to the different platform, to the different conditions, to the different part of the world. There's lots of things to learn, more so than just shooting at a piece of paper at 100 yards or even shooting at a target at 1,000 yards. There's another whole level of learning that'll always be specific to your area and specific to your skills. Like I said, all those things involved. But it's also a little bit of a self-discovery thing. By pushing yourself and pushing your, whether that's your partnership or your teamwork or your platform or whatever it is, there's things you're discovering out of doing that side of things. Which also means in the world of setting something up, the logic of just going to, I just want to buy all the right bits and pieces because I just want to know what the best stuff is, which is where a lot of people come from. there is the presumption that the world's hiding the best answer from them, and they just want that best answer so they can go and buy it. No, there isn't a best answer. There are things that are more suited than other things, but, and I mean one component than another component, and in some cases one brand will do a better job than another brand, but a lot of cases it really comes down to your specifics. And the truth is, that is part of the ride. That's what this is. You know, for my opinion in particular, and for what suited me in particular, and I suppose there's the logic of, if I don't need to spend as much money if I know the right thing to buy to start off with. Well, yes, that can be a point for sure, but the point of the actual conversation I would like to bring forward is that actually the ride and making those mistakes and learning from those mistakes, and then having to recover and financially, whatever that is, to make that and make it right, teaches you a lot better. I believe you learn a lot better by tripping down to your knees and then having to step back up. It makes you not want to trip down again. So I believe you learn more and gain more, and this ride is better out of making those mistakes yourself and learning how to cover those, rather than simply asking someone a question. Do your research, do your due diligence, go through your process of what you need to, whether that's using Google, whether that's going to the local library, whether that's going to enroll in a course, whether that's whatever it is. Learn the long way. Learn the real way, rather than asking the simple question. There's places, don't get me wrong, where there is a question that'll help in that point, but looking for that specific simple answer is in my core logic to what I've done is not really in the spirit of ELR. It is really in the spirit of making yourself better, becoming a better shooter, and pushing your boundaries, and that comes out of you working that stuff out, using all this information, listening to all these people, but not looking for a set answer, looking for your answer. So anyway, enough, that's my preaching. I'll see if I can stop on that. Okay, so like I said, the other way to do this, to try and explain the bit of the process and the bits and pieces needed, is to look at where I started. Now, this is the final form, or not the final form, I'd never say that, but it is the form that's in at the moment. This is simply a 10-year-old Hauer 1500 rifle. It's the barrel, and the barrel and the action are still exactly what they were. They are factory, and it's still shot very well. Last time I shot it, I think I shot it egg at 1100 yards. It performs amazingly well. But now it's probably about to get a new barrel, not because this barrel's worn out, and it still shoots very well, don't get me wrong. It's probably up in the 2,500 rounds for a 243, or 3,000 rounds, somewhere around there. But really, it's a really good platform, and the one bit that's letting it down is the barrel, and that is because it is just a 24-inch 1 and 10 twist. So yes, that's where I started. I started with a 1 and 10 twist, 24-inch. I didn't know much of anything at that stage. I started with a slightly smaller version of a Nico Sterling scope on it. It's what was recommended by the people who sold me the rifle right back then. And it was really, I had been around rifles for a long time, been shooting them a lot, but hadn't really pushed into the boundaries, well, hadn't at all pushed into the boundaries of extreme long range shooting. I had simply been down the road of a little bit of target shooting, but hunting is largely what I did. Always shot them, tried to shoot them precisely, but never really put enough effort into it. Just factory ammo, and didn't understand. I started shooting it with 55 grain bullets, and I first started to stretch out to 800 yards with 55 grain bullets, and found it challenging for various reasons. The thing I'd done is I bought a rifle that shot really, really well. It was a really good little hunter. I put a little muzzle brake on the front of it, which is one of these here, which was a Hinterland Shooting Supply muzzle brake. Did the job fine. I found issues later on, but for that level of things as a hunter, it worked perfectly. It was in a couple of different stocks before this. Back then it was in an Axiom, a Black Hawk Axiom stock. I had the standard, the first bipod I had was the Harris bipod, and I think that's basically, it had a plastic magazine. It was a fairly simple, shot really well, and I could still recall shooting that at 1100 yards with consistent hits on a 12-inch plat. At that stage I'd gone to I think in that format, I think I'd just gone to hand loading Remington rounds. But I suppose the story at that place, I'd started to sort things out a little bit, but started to realise I needed to upgrade things. I was finding that I wanted to change my shooting position, and I was putting the bag on top of pieces of wood to try and get myself some more stability. But I quickly found that even though I'd gone to a couple of levels of scope, and the first thing I would talk about in the things that I'd done, is that trying to spend the least I could on a semi-tactical scope was a mistake. For ELR shooting, or even long-range shooting, where you really want to be able to dial in your scope, spending money in that place is a really good place to start. Now, I said, as I would come back to, I didn't do that properly to start off with. I started with something that was weren't adjustable turrets at all. I moved to the first level of tactical scopes, and this little fella here, which did the sort of job. It wasn't very consistent, and all that got me onto target. I wasn't really able to dial properly. Now, right back then, I took the huge plunge of going with the scope you see right there. I went with the Night Force Attacker because I'd figured out at that stage, for me, I wanted to go further, and I wanted as much internal elevation as possible to allow for bullet drop. So it was a big step. Equally, I'd come from playing with cars, and that's what I do for a living, and my cars had consumed lots of money, and every time I wanted to take a step with a car of any decent size, I was spending $5,000 or $10,000. So as much as back then it was a $3,500 scope was a lot of money, it was in the car world still a small hit compared to what the cars always did to me. So it was something that I felt was where I wanted to go, a step up. I liked the look of the Night Force brand. I didn't know at that stage they were largely an Australian company, or Australian founded company. And the internal elevation is what I wanted to go with. I'd already understood MOA, I'd been working with MOA for lots of years, so that's what I went with, but there's no right or wrong on that side of things. The likes of MOA or MIL really come down to the people you're working with, what you're familiar with, or the competition you're looking at, or all other things that go into that sort of stuff. And for me, I wanted to go with second focal plane because I wanted to be able to use the scope for holdover. And I've done videos on second focal plane, first focal plane. Those bits and pieces are really all your preferences, but what's really important is internal elevation. If you want to shoot ELR, you need to be able to dial up, and precision of adjustment is also very important. Extreme precision matters later on, but moderate precision of the turrets is important. And then things like that it's MOA, so that means MOA in the dial and MOA in the mill, or in the reticle, or mill, whatever it is, so that you can learn as you go. It's very important. And I suppose if there's one place I would take a step too far in any of this process, would be your scope to start off with. Now, I'm not saying it be a Night Force Attacker, whatever the scope is, but if you spend a little bit more in a scope, you can swap a scope over, you can modify your rifle, and the scope can keep up with it. And it's a place that certainly I went step by step by step. I went from, actually, no Night Force Attacker. I didn't go straight to the Night Force Attacker. I'm remembering now. I went to a Citron scope to start off with, which had a fair bit of both those bits and pieces. It was very good. Was more budget conscious to where I wanted to go. It was shortly after that I went to this once I'd figured out those details. Not the Citrons, and there's a whole range of scopes that are in that place that are really good. But in the world of going to real ELR, it's a place that I can really put forward that you could spend a little bit extra fairly early on and it's not going to go to waste, but there are cheaper ways to do that as well. But certainly, lots of adjustment is good. Glass, yes, it's important. It's not the deal breaker. Clear enough is good enough. Yes, you can spend more money on it, but there's a point where you start spending money and you're not getting more out of glass clarity. And glass clarity is really more for bird photography. Unless you're after the perfect picture, for sure. You're after hunting and really low light, the best low light, yeah, for sure. In the way of the ELR side of things, as long as you've got decent clarity, then what color it is isn't the important feature. So it's not a place I would spend money. I'd plan to spend money on like I said, decent clarity. And then I suppose power is the other things that people ask. Really, to start off with, I was shooting at 15 power right out to 3,000 yards. And when I didn't have enough other external elevation in my systems to go further, I was backing back down to 10 power and 6 power to shoot even further. So it's still doable. Yes, once you get out to there, it's nice to be able to dial up a little bit, but you've got to have all the other features in there. So the other thing that I did very early on, and there's videos on here as well, is I started to learn how to set things up to get all that elevation. Now there's like I said, videos on there, but basically canting your scope forward enough so you can use all of the internal elevation is a very good trick the moment you start really stretching it out. Let's stop on the scope. I don't want to get too bogged down. As said, the rifle was 1 in 10 twist. Now, if I really knew what then I would have gone and found the same. The 243 was an awesome option, but I'd have to say there's really no bad options in the cartridges. You're learning, and ELR is about pushing the round a long way. So you can even start with a pistol caliber cartridge, or say the 357 Magnum, something like that. You can still shoot ELR with those, but largely you're really talking about a centerfire rifle. Or even a 22, but let's and trying to push them too far with all the same gear is a fun place to start. But in this conversation, let's talk about really going into the 1,500, 2,000, 2,500 sort of yards or meters, whichever language you want to talk. And in that situation, you can take a 223 and shoot a mile. You can take a 243 and shoot 2,000 meters, which I've been with this, and it'll shoot further. You can take a 308 and probably shoot 2,500 meters. These are all doable. We're in some cases moving from extreme long range to ultra long range. But what I'm trying to say there is there isn't a bad one. Some people say there's the best one. Really, my opinion is that the simple thing I would largely say is if you keep it a little bit smaller and learn the fundamentals better, where you're not getting buffed around so far, is a good idea. As to whether it's more efficient or less efficient, you sort of learn faster with a slightly less efficient one. You probably get to push a bit further faster with a slightly more efficient one. But really, it's a starting place, and that's all it should be considered as. If you're going to do this for any length of time, you're not going to start and finish with the same rifle, so it doesn't matter so much where you start. Let's get back to this one, the 243. It's a 1 in 10 twist. And the 243 really, in my opinion, is going to, and I haven't even shot one to any great extent at that level, will be with a 1 in 8 or a 1 in 7 twist, probably 1 in 7.5 twist, and be able to run 115 or the 108 or the slightly heavier bullets. And then you're going to start to use that power with a heavier bullet, and that's going to do better at your extreme long range. In saying that, this is a 1 in 10. It's done so very well. It's got out to 2,000 meters with 95 grain bullets, and it's worked really well. So it's also 24 inch, where 26, 27, 28, you'd start to get to optimize the heavier bullets. But once again, we're talking about a starting place. And you learn these things as you go along. So still very thankful I started here. The other thing you see it in now is a nice big heavy chassis. This is an Xlr chassis. And it is definitely, I suppose that's another thing in the process. This started in what it came with, which was a Black Hawk axial. I think there was another chassis I put it in between, but I really want to move into is, it's another one of those things. There are less quality and there are more quality. There is no perfect option. There's no best option. For me, being engineer slash more mechanic slash engineer, gunsmith, etc., something that I can modify worked really well for me. You'll see I've got a different bag rod on the back of it. I've modified the front. I've got my bipod system on the front of it. These are features that I like to be able to do because that's what I do. For you, in the way of making those decisions, in a lot of cases, some adjustability is going to be an important thing, or a bolt-on thing. If you're a manufacturer, if you're a backyard operator and do bits and pieces where you're fine with modifying things, then generally working in something like an aluminium chassis is easy to work with. But if you're really like most guys, really want to be able to bolt things on, buy things that go with bits and pieces, then that's really the research down that path. Adjustability and adaptability is important what you're buying. A bit I should come back to is the action. This is a Hauer 1500. It's a pretty good option. But I suppose what I'm actually saying, the Remington 700 is probably the best option in this field. And what I'm actually talking about is its bolt-on ability. So what you can buy for it. And that means your rails, your chassis, stocks, the triggers, even in some cases what they like to work with and the barrel like the barrel, that side of things, but all the bits and pieces you can get for the actual action. A lot of people will tell you, okay, this action or these rifles are far more accurate, so buy them. My comment would be their accuracy is a funny term, because the truth of it is, even the worst of them, unless there's an actual fault with it, but even the worst of the brands, if you had a rating of it and found there was a worst one, you'd find still in the right hands it'll probably outshoot the average shooter. What I'm really trying to say is accuracy is about everything else. How it locks up, how it hooks up, whether it's got 3 lugs or 2 lugs or 7 lugs or all those features. Yes, technically they're nice features, but in practical terms, they're not the key ingredient. The key ingredient is what you can do with it. And you can almost always take the worst and still, with enough work to it, turn it into up with the best. So I would put, not to exclude any of them, but the reason I chose a Hauer to start off with, and my next rifle was a Remington 700, was what I could bolt to it. So being a cool kid because I've got one of these, and I don't want to go into other brand names, and because it's guaranteed to have quarter MO accuracy or whatever it is really more about the platform, really more about everything else. And to a large degree in ELR specifically, you are going to be messing with things to get the thing to perform properly. Whether that's changing over the stock, whether it's changing over setting up your bipod, or it's messing around, whatever it is you're messing around with, the barrel and the action are bits and pieces you'll play with later on. But to start off with, the factory ones will work well, and you can largely trust all of them to go with where you can take them. And keep in mind, with some of them, you can't even change a barrel in some factory actions without sending them back to the manufacturer. It's rare, but there are some actions like that. So do your research down that sort of road. The simple fallback is in the likes of the Remingtons, the likes of the Hauers. There's a little bit of options coming, more and more options coming in for the likes of the Tickers. And then I'd go to, I don't know enough about the rest of the crowd. But do your research and make sure, by simply doing your Google search, and see what rails you can get for things, see what chassis you can get for things, and largely in that bracket you'll see where the industry is, and that's a simple, sensible choice to go there. As for that, in the chassis side of things, as said, you work with what suits you. In some cases, that's a big Macmillan stock you want because you want that particular stock, and yeah, awesome, that works down that road. And I certainly have all of those stocks in different forms, from the Bell & Carlson to the Manners to the Macmillan, and then any brand names. I'm not really trying to brand name at all. Listen, all good and all work well in their form. Some are personal fits to things. Some I'm the sort of person will go to modifying, where I'll cut into the fiberglass and rework the fiberglass and do that sort of stuff. Fair bit more painful. In the likes of wood, I'm not a huge fan of wood. It can work. People make their own wood stocks, that side of things. I get it. Largely for the way wood behaves around moisture, the way wood is to work with, the way you can't build to it, that sort of stuff, I largely prefer to stay away from it. And I'd much rather go with the composite in places, and now more and more so going with the aluminium, because we have this bolt-on ability about things. And even in this where I have modified things, it's still able to be bolted on. I'm not having to actually do anything other than mechanically bolting things. But that is something to research as to what your abilities are and what you want to go. And for most guys, having a bit of adjustability in whether it's a lock-up form or it's a quick adjust form, then that comes down to what suits you. And once again, there's another thing that I have videos on that side of things as well. I think I suppose the other bits and pieces you move into, bipods, spotting scopes, ammunition. This one here, I started off with this stuff. You end up with all that stuff, really part of the ride that suits the way I've done things, and I think is a really good way to go down that path, is to build up step by step. Certainly to try and do for the guys who want to jump in just the deep end and kick and paddle hard. Listen, fair enough. That's your process. It's still going to come back to some of these fundamentals. I think it's a very good process to go through. Start with decent factory ammo. That's what I did here. It worked really well. Found what sort of worked in the rifle, and then I started to try and improve on that. Rather than just try and build a hand load and try and make it shoot well, I knew what I was doing with a factory load, and then started to work with and try and get better results than that by doing not a duplicate, but using the same bullet weight and trying to understand things. In all forms, what you end up finding the more you get into this is that you save money by spending money generally. What I'm trying to say there is by buying better quality brass, you find you get better results. So you end up with, be it brass slice, but generally your process is done faster by doing your research and going for better quality to start off with. When the likes of the scopes, a little bit the same story. But in all cases, doing a step-by-step process is really not just smart for making sure you're making the right choices, but it's also really, in my school of thought, the way I come from, where I've come from, it's really the essence of ELR. It's what we're doing. So for us, it's been from this rifle here, which is, and now we have lots of rifles built in forms that I want to suit, that all started from this rifle, from this bag, from not this, but a similar scope to this, with a box of ammo like this, a Harris Bipod, and even spotting scope side of things to muzzle brake side of things, are all things that I went through and found improvements I could make with it. And the discovery path is probably more important. That's more the experience to me. Once we get out and we can extend our boundaries and get further, listen, it's great to get results and do more, but always staying learning is really the key ingredient for me. And as I started with, the way we do it, it's about us, it's about our little team, what we can achieve together, which means you're also dealing with the frustrations together. We try and keep our job hats on. So Sam is definitely the person who's keeping an eye out for everything, and also has to deal with my frustration when things aren't working, when I'm largely to blame, but whether it's an equipment problem or whatever it is, but that's her job there. I have to deal with her frustration when she's dealing with, she can't see things, which then comes into, I have to understand more about the conditions and to make sure that as much as possible that I set up things to make it so my spotter can see impacts. And then our communication path, all this sort of stuff is, in my humble opinion, very good life lessons, and teach you a lot about everything. You learn how to deal with this sort of stuff better. And for the people, I suppose what I'm really trying to say is that for the people after the simple best answer, because they just like to do this and they just like to make it work, to a large degree I think you're missing a lot of the ride. The ride is about discovery. For us, it's about engineering things, and I try and share as much as I can. We've turned it from building things to make our life better to getting lots of questions. Can I get that? Can I get that? To turn it into a store where we sell some of this stuff that we build, the stuff that we're happy enough to think the rest of the world might want, we put on the store. From our muzzle brakes, our Bipod systems, the universal bag riders, that sort of stuff, we certainly have found great success with it. And the logic has driven out exactly that, the learning process. So if I can share anything with people, that story, I don't know if it ended up quite as I started to try and do to go through this rifle. This rifle is was the beginning of our ELR process. I remember setting up a table at 800 yards with balloons on it and trying to hit it with 55 grain bullets with a scope. I couldn't figure out any dialing on and that sort of stuff. So to now end up with good ballistic apps, precision scopes, to where that's sort of chicken feed, that sort of shot, but that's all out of that discovery process in all forms, in everything from the way we use a spotting scope, to the type of spotting scope, to the way we set up a rifle, to the way we communicate, to the ground, to the condition, to where the light needs to be, to understand the wind. All those things are learned best by a little bit of advice and a whole heap of going out in there and doing it. Anyway guys, that's my babble on that one. As said multiple times, there's lots of videos that we go through and explain these things in the details we can. Very much not doing brand recommendation or component recommendation. And for those guys who think, okay, he knows, so I'll ring him up, email him, Facebook him, comment and ask a question as to what component. I got this choice and this choice, which one would you go with? That's not an answer I'll provide, because I don't know your conditions, I don't know your situation, and I'm very protective, or really don't want to be wrong. I don't want to make the wrong decision, and I can't make that decision without standing in your shoes. But there's another side to it. It's important that you figure that decision out. I find my way has always been, I learn a lot more from making the wrong decision and working out why I made that decision wrong to make the next decision right. And very rarely do I get to ask a salt. That's a thing that I have to figure out myself. And to be honest, as much as that might be seen as the wrong thing to do, I'd much rather our world, you, the one who wants to answer that question, what component would you recommend? I'd much rather you learn that way as well. Yeah, sorry to be preachy again, I'll stop. Like I said, lots of videos that'll go through and give you ideas about bits and pieces, and the things that you should be looking for, how to set things up, from setting up the scope to understanding how your bipod system works and how to preload your bipod, from understanding the front to the back to the in-betweens, all over the channel. If you use the search feature with some titles, you'll generally be able to find that sort of stuff. And as though you've got to listen to a lot of me droning on, I'm trying to share as much as I can on that score. And for those people who aren't aware, we are not a YouTube fan or fan under a YouTube of ours. We get very little from them. So if you'd like to help us with some stuff, if you would like to be part of the team or the people that support us in the way of bringing these videos to you, and help us financially, then there's ways to do that. There's links below the video, which you go to the 4AW icon. That'll take you to a channel page. There is a PayPal link there that can let you either donate monthly or just make a simple gift or donation. We also have a web store that has these components I'm talking about on there, so that's over on the web store. And there's also bits you can purchase which give us support as well. So any support is greatly appreciated. Leave any comments or questions or thoughts or stories or whatever it is below. And thanks for checking in on us, guys. We'll catch you next time.